Well, good morning, Saniel.
Good morning, Ed.
This is Ed Reither with B-Zone, speaking with Saniel Bonder in California. Now, I want to get the school that you're waking up in Mutuality is the school that you have created and are now involved with, correct?
Waking Down, actually, in Mutuality, is I describe it as the expression of our work. And when I say our, I particularly mean my wife, Linda, who's my full partner, Linda Gross-Bonder, and me. It's the way our work is best known. So it's a dharmic expression. The school legally is Human Sun, S-U-N Institute. Human Sun Heart is a kind of frame that I sometimes use, just a single phrase that covers everything. There are other dharmic expressions of our basic approach that complement and extend with the Waking Down and Mutuality principles. And it's all essentially, as you and I have chatted about a bit, we see it as a next evolution of this greater capital H heart nature, which, in some ways it's a word for God. I mean, Ramana Maharshi, my first heart master or guru, once wrote in a poem, "Heart is thy name, O Lord." So, we're speaking about that greater reality and our sense that through these different expressions that we've come through with over the years, this is part of the heart's next emergence or evolution. And
now, may I interrupt? I'm sorry to interrupt, and some people find I'm a little bit rude, but I have a New York nature.
Okay, I'm a New Yorker also. I can dance with that.
Because the world is so big and that heart is so transcendental, meaning covering all of us and more. To use a metaphor, I just want to go back to the word. So you're not using waking up.
Yes.
You're using waking down.
Yes.
Now, if I'm going to jump here. So there's a descending quality to your work I'm sure there's an ascension to it, but there's you're emphasizing an embodied work as opposed to a mystical work, just to use framework of the tradition.
Although one of the phrases we have for what's realized, as an example, is nirvanic immanence. So, it is profoundly mystical in the general sense. It's not necessarily visionary mysticism. It's not necessarily, travel to other dimensions. It can include that, and has and does for many people. But it's essentially an awakening of that greater nature here, kind of clay feet on the ground. And part of what I've actually come to recognize over time, with the help of some interesting information that has come my way, is that a way of characterizing what happens in people's process, and we've seen this with now hundreds and hundreds of people, is that something gets activated that is, they don't necessarily experience it in the heart or the heart region. Some do, some don't. It doesn't appear to really make any difference. It's not preferable that they do necessarily. And by the way, some of the people who've awakened in the context of our work and gone on even with their own ways of helping others, they don't use that language of heart. That's something that's more intrinsic for us. But the main point I wanted to get to there is that as that greater nature awakens or starts coming alive and awake whole bodily, one of the early symptoms, so to speak, or forms of evidence, we don't want to put a stigma on it, is that there's a sense of a coming down, of a landing. And it's not just of energy, it's not of mind, it is of that foundational feeling, intuition of being.
So can I use it, because I'm reading as you speaking, and I'm getting a feeling that, because I read and study and whatever, that you come to rest.
Yes. Well, a very dynamic rest. You know, you and I were just talking a minute ago. It's like, you know, we've called this a second birth, and I have, you know, embryological, you know, minimal amount of science, but you know, a sense that there's something that goes on that recapitulates a birthing process. But so if we call it a second birth or second life, one of the kind of jokes in the community over the years is, yeah, you know, you've had a second birth, now you got to get a life. Learning, thank you, learning how to live as that greater identity without having had to undergo a scorched earth policy of destruction of absolute perfect transcendence of ego. In fact, it's a both and so much of the living then is a paradox of that kind.
Well, this is interesting, because as I'm filtering at this, what you're saying is that and correct me if I'm wrong, is that, and I want to qualify this, is that not only within the Christian tradition, within every tradition, there's a certain kind of transformation or death, however you want to coin the word, but there's a birth, as you're referring to. There's a transmutation. Something happens that awakens one to a new sense of themselves. And that is the true beginning in many traditions, not all of them, I would say, as true spiritual life is the beginning, as you're saying, then you get a life. Now, we have this background of karmic movement of your life, your marriage, your children, your family, your language, your history, and your job, and everything else that goes along with it. Now, in the traditions, they say you've got to clean it up so you can then devote your time and attention to this new awareness, if you will. And you're now saying you don't have to spend your work on that, but you've now got a new understanding.
Yes, you have a new and you know, quoting an old friend, mentor, and guru that, you know, who's meant quite a bit to both of us. It's a radical understanding. In other words, it's grounded in and coming from the very roots of our existence. And that new ground, that, you know, people, it's interesting the kind of, you know, straight from the heart and gut language that people use rather than quoting lofty esoteric terminology. You know, when they go through this kind of transition, historically now for, you know, nearly 30 years, as I've been doing this work, people would say stuff like, wow, I am really here in a way for the first time. And the I, if you ask them, well, you know, what is this I you're referring to? They'll say, well, yeah, it's weird because I'm still me, you know, the guy or the gal here and my stuff. I'm not any kind of perfected spiritual being, but I am also, you know, one with everything, as they say, and, you know, make jokes about it in cartoons, but there is that quality of a release of the separated, pressurized sense of ego into still being very much the local person, but also at one with, united with to a deep degree. I mean, I began to use the term onlyness to describe the radical sense of that completeness and allness and singularity.
So to use a Buddhist terminology of sudden and gradual, is this for your, when you witness or see these kinds of confessions and transformations, do you see a moment of a sudden awakening, or is this a gradual awakening that comes?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. And you know, when I started, Ed, as you know, this kind of precipitated itself almost immediately after I left the work of Hadida, ceased to be an active devotee, and went on my way hoping to find, divine grace and get reactivated on my process. And lo and behold, this whole awakening process kicked into gear very quickly. And as I then was registering, well, wow, that was unexpected. And, I mean, technically I was in disgrace by leaving, but this was, grace had other plans. And I began to feel that, okay, something else is happening here. This is not in any of the books. It's not charted out. Let's find out what works and what doesn't. Let's see if we can democratize this thing so that more and more people have access to it. Part of the cosmic joke of it is if you don't do all that work to master and purify and clarify and refine all of the personality elements, the mind, and so forth and so on, before such an awakening, then if you're wise, you're going to be attentive to what you need to look into and keep growing and refining later. But the recognition has been in that experimental mode. We were looking to see, well, what does work, what doesn't? How does this happen for people? Let's not impose anything we've inherited in terms of assumptions. And sure enough, for me, that radical awakening certainly culminated in a primary moment that, to this day, I still like to celebrate the day that it happened. But for others, people who had gone through their own awakenings, many of them having a primary moment like that, and then had become themselves transmitter teachers in the mid to later 90s as our work was unfolding. Some of the people began reporting back to others of us, hey, I've been working with people and they're not having a moment.
And you had what?
They're not having a moment.
Right. Yeah.
And the phrase that emerged over a little bit of time was people ooze into the awakening. And that has, we've seen some benefits and also some challenges, because if there isn't that clear moment, they can tend to kind of wonder afterward more. But on the other hand, that more gradual process also has allowed people more time to do more of the what for them was necessary work to get to that clarity.
So now, so our conversation is growing because there's a couple of elements I wanted to get to in what you just said. One is the awakening that brought this to you after you left. Two is that there is some process that you have understood that was capable of initiating or establishing a process that would be an awakening process.
Yes.
So there is some form of, there's an element of alchemy here. There's some element of something that you can initiate.
Mm-hmm.
So whichever you feel comfortable with, whether if you could describe something about what brought you an awakening into this process, or the process itself, how that is with, how do you work with people to establish this work? How do you, not that you have to detail everything, but is there
Sure.
a general sense of
Sure.
how the process works?
Yeah, well, I think it really helps here to reference and honor my sources, or the resources that help me, help make me possible, or make this transformational activation possible. The further along I go, footnote here, further along I go, it seems like we get plenty of opportunities to be humbled by all this. So, I don't even like to talk about my transmission.
Yeah, that's why, I mean, I understand. That's why I didn't want to, because
Yeah, but nonetheless, there's a stewardship that comes with going through this and feeling called to help others. And for me, as I look back from very early on in my own personal spiritual quest, I was served and helped by great empowered yogis, sages, masters, quite a number of them. And their, shall we say, activation power, or we could use that word transmission, was very noticeable. It had tremendous effects on me, and it was extremely important. And, then when I left the guru who I had spent the longest time as a very ardent devotee of, Adida Samaj, and it wasn't, as you know, but I'll say it, I wasn't thrown out of the work. It became no longer viable for me, even though I knew I was risking maybe losing my way. But then what happened, among other things, was, and it took me a while to recognize it, it had a kind of cosmic joke playfulness almost to it. The great divine feminine, the goddess, the Shakti, I like to call her the she mystery, that principle, force, person, in effect grabbed hold, and her transmission, or her magic, use that word. You can't explain this stuff. It's all code when we talk about it.
Yeah.
That became extremely important. And then what occurred over the ensuing years was having this drive to find a way to make this same kind of radical shift possible for others, whether it was going to show up for them in a moment or over a period of time, and the ongoing growth beyond that, because there's been very important further evolutions for me personally and for others. And so, yeah, we've worked out a process, and it includes, prior to that, shall we call it second birth, there is sure enough a death sequence, something coming to an end. A phrase we have for it is the rot, which is picturesque. It doesn't do technical justice to what's happening, but it's how people feel it. It's like everything they were doing for years suddenly or gradually no longer seems to work. They don't know where to turn. They may feel like a failure. And in this process, that very quality of what they're going through is actually progress. It's a releasing from the old ways and the earlier foundation of how they were growing, and they get established on a new foundation. And that's then what activates all this. So there are particular pieces of the process related to the waking aspect, is the awakening of consciousness in an embodied form. In other words, it certainly includes that sense of a transcendental quality, but it is right here. It's equally imminent. The down part, and that's the main factor of the waking side. The down part includes both that deeper sense of embodiment and also shadow work. Not, we're not therapists. I mean, some people who do this or have done this are themselves certified therapists, but it's not therapy. It's more of a recognition process and integration process than, an ongoing exploration of why this happened, that happened, and so on. That can come into play, but it's secondary. So there's the shadow integration side that goes on. And then the mutuality principle is equally important. In some ways, it's not a self-realization where the selfness is so absolutely outstanding. It's more, we could say, a self plus other realization. It's awakening to that sameness in the paradox of a whole world of others, other things, other beings. And the mutuality, the between, the capacity to honor and acknowledge that, even though we feel a unity with someone, what makes them tick may be very, very different from us. And in some ways, everybody's, I used the phrase at one point, a sealed mystery. And even in some ways mysterious to ourselves. So that's, I think, part of the humility of it is, Adida's phrase from way back, divine ignorance. You really are living in mystery.
I was hearing a lot of Jordan Peterson and what you just said, especially when you're working with the shadow, and also the awakening process. But the difference, of course, is what you're speaking about with the Shakti, or what is known in the awakening power in Indian, Hindu schools. But having had some experience in that for myself, there definitely, the body is extremely, the energy is there is internal energy that activates a certain internal energy. So, I mean, I'm not going to sit in meditation with my belly slouched in and my shoulders slumped forward. I'm going to be wanting to be sitting up because the energy now is has activated itself in that yogic kind of manner, right? Yeah.
And the activation is so primal that, among other things, people may find they're not really moved to do formal sitting meditation once this new ground is established, or they may feel all the more inclined to it. But the quality of that, I like to use that word, activation, is so much now a given.
Your wattage has increased from a 50-watt bulb or 20-watt bulb to
hugely. Well, that's why, Linda and I are a big part of our current plan and drive here is to put together what, we intend to be a flagship and legacy book. We're none of us are the spring chicken stage anymore. But we do have a sense that we've got a lot of years ahead if we're blessed to have that. And our fundamental message that emerged over this last decade or so in the evolution, the refinement of the work is the sun, S-U-N, the sun in your heart is rising. In other words, that greater nature is coming alive and awake in, as, and through actually every body. It's part of it's essential to what drives us humans to be going through all these massive changes we do as individuals and as a species. And once that sun-like radiant realization is established, then, well, I mean, in practical terms for me, previous to that, I would be much more sensitive to the depletion of my fundamental energy. And I'd have to be very careful about it and so on. Afterward, not so much, you know, and it doesn't mean that I don't take care of myself, and it doesn't mean I can't get enervated and all that. But there's a primal energy shift that has to do with, you know, we could say, in esoteric terms, the yogic technology of where and how this takes place, that then makes turns everybody into something of a beacon, depending on how individuals live it. And of course, people have done so in different ways.
Yeah, I guess the beacon is what the central focus of the teaching would have to be. I mean, somebody has be the transmitter or a vehicle of transmission, because as you're speaking, because I understand that we have the phenomena happening, but we also have the numinous, the unspoken, the radiance that is not limited. And also, if we later on get into talking about the larger moment, of which we all are participating in some form or fashion to whatever degree. But it is clear in the obvious nature of anybody in the zeitgeist of the moment here that there is a phenomenal process of transformation happening in the world, expressed in many different ways, through the phenomena, you being one, and then what you're speaking about as being one, but you're able to now hold it and to work with it, to be in a agency of it.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. And we've learned many lessons along the way, and for which we're very grateful. And thank you. I mean, at this stage, it's pretty exciting for Linda and me. We feel like we're entered upon a third act, so to speak, in our lives and our work. And it has to do with, I mentioned earlier, from early on, my kind of impulse was, okay, I'm a Jeffersonian Democrat of this stuff. Let's get access to this out there for people, and let's not have the trappings of the old ways and cultures actually function as traps. And so we've had, on an intimate scale, really tremendous success with that. And at the same time, for Linda and me, there's a drive to reach and touch lots and lots of people, and to help people begin to have more confidence that there is something intrinsically divine about them, if you want to use religious language, something profoundly sacred. That noumenon, the numinous, is intrinsic to us. We are not fundamentally sinful and bad and, having to atone endlessly to a great other God somewhere, or even a greater self that, wants nothing to do with all of our ordinariness. So we're excited about it. And at this stage, to thank you, come right into that, the zeitgeist of the moment, or however you pronounce that word. My sense is that this, it was an idea that occurred to me, the guy, democratizing this, but that idea was generated from that greater nature that is awakening itself. And my sense is, especially with the advent of the changes in technology, for instance, being able to have, this conversation where, I'm actually talking to this, machine here, but I'm talking to Ed, my friend, who's whatever, 1,000 miles away or 500.
Three, I believe.
3,000. You're on the East Coast now.
Yeah.
So, and sure enough, we've found that even telephone is a fine medium for transmission to help activate. And part of what we see about the activation, again, is that it's self-democratizing, so to speak. It's finding ways to move that don't need to be managed within the constraints of previous ways even we ourselves have gone about this. So one example or illustration of that is that in an earlier stage of our work, we, and then growing numbers of others, several dozen actually at some point, had a whole system of training and certifying mentors and then teacher transmitters who would help others go through the waking down in mutuality process. That form of our work changed, and for the two of us, we began to feel, well, maybe we need to set up a new training system that's just kind of with our own perspective, because it had become important to differentiate with some of our previous colleagues. We went through that. It had its challenges, but we began to see in this newer stage, that's not what's happening. I don't want someone to be under the impression that they need to become a purveyor of our way of articulating this. We need to be talking to people who are finding their own expression. And that's more and more what we see happening. And there is this sense, if I look back on the history of the whole thing, there is this sense that more of even the activation power is in some ways more readily accessible to people now than it was in the earlier time. And that is increasing. I feel like almost like I'm babbling here because I can't really.
Well, are you speaking?
Something that I'm seeing some evidence of, but it's in the early stages.
In your work, you're speaking about that intensification that's happening in your work.
Yes. Yeah.
Which I would assume corresponds to what is happening in the world. I mean,
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. So, we've worked, as you know, mostly on a relatively small scale. Our work is not all that well known, but we're looking to bring it out more. This new book, The Sun in Your Heart is Rising, or it could be several volumes. We don't want, I realize, if we put this all in one book, it's going to be like Gebser's Ever-Present or Wilber's Sex Ecology, Spirituality, a book as brick. Don't want to go that route. So this may be a number of volumes, remains to be seen, but it also will be truly co-authored and co-created. Linda is a very talented artist. We're going to have lots of photography and her art and others' art in it, as well as links to AV material of all kinds. We really want it to be a very living, dynamic process for people. And we're putting together a goal and a vision plan for, with the help of a woman who's been in our work for many years, who's quite an accomplished executive in one of the universities in the UK. And we've come up with a vision statement of 1 million hearts illumined. And by that, we don't mean that 1 million people will go through this whole awakening process, but rather that as Linda likes to say, that many people, potentially more, some big access of that greater heart nature to others such that they can start to feel nourished and, in the positive sense of the word, comforted. The Latin conforte, present with strength, present with more strength and able to take their own growth and transformation into its next phases, even current times, as suddenly nuclear war is on somebody's table again, and climate change is barely being addressed so far. And we're in for here we have a pandemic that, okay, it's becoming endemic now, but it ain't going away. So, in the midst of all that, the degree of existential angst that people are under is part of what's really driving our call. And there's a combination then of a wider outreach that touches people at a distance, including many we won't ever know, and also the intensive personal work that we're very good at in terms of helping people go through this kind of transition and multiple transitions afterwards. Some of the people we coach personally have already been awake in this embodied way for 10, 15 years or more, and they're finding there's no map for the next stage. And, we're continuing to come into our own next moments. So it's all pretty dynamic. I'm excited about it.
Oh, it sounds dynamic. It sounds like it is a real, potential. The actualization and the potentiality are combined in that living process.
Yeah, very much so.
Well, I hope you don't write that 900-page time and being, or
no. It anything that takes more than 350 or 400 pages becomes 2 books.
So I want to pick up on one term as mutuality, because
Thank you.
that implies that there's some social dynamic to it other than a individual process. Yeah,
thank you. Well, in some ways, my very first spiritual teacher, once my quest had started to get underway when I was a college sophomore, I guess it was Martin Buber. And, Buber is famous for I and Thou, and he is the champion of deep dialogue and respecting the mystery of the other, not only the divine other, but human others, all others. And, though I studied his work only briefly, it had a lasting impact on me. And what wound up happening in our work, there was a particular point early on, it became known as waking down, but the mutuality principle was really important. And I remember at some point saying to Linda and the other people who had become teachers with us, we can still call it waking down, that works, but we need to equally refer to it as waking down in mutuality, because the otherness is not just a nice social adjunct. It's an important factor. We are a we. And I remember when I visited Ramana Maharshi's ashram in 1994, after I'd gone through my awakening and so forth, and was bringing the work out. There's these caves up on that sacred mountain, Arunachala, that he lived in for his first, 20 years as an awakened adept. And so we had, my then partner and I had a day where we got to go up and visit the caves and sit in them and so on. And, and I went into the primary cave that he spent many years living in. I just felt that deep, silent presence that I had felt from him when I first saw his picture, many years before. And I wasn't really getting anything new. I was like, if there's something else I need to open into, please show me. And I wasn't getting anything. But then I went out and sat on the little patio there. And I noticed when we had walked up in the early morning hours, there were a lot of monkeys around, but they were all huddled together in the cold and, kind of picking lice out of each other's fur and all that, fleas. But at this point, it was high noon, and they were running all over the place, scampering around. And what struck me then as a kind of a living teaching was we are not just this transcendental consciousness. We're also a bunch of monkeys. And monkey type, primates are very, very social animals. And, so to me, that, I remember when I was in India, a kind of admonition came through. You have to help open the gateway of mutuality. So the living of this collectively is part of where that democratization, it's almost like you can feel an arc, an energetic thing happening by being together, by being with one another in our humanness, including all of our messy stuff that has seemed to be the enemy of our spirituality. And by green lighting all that, is a phrase we like to use, without wallowing in it, without assuming we're going to be stuck with being that way all our lives.
But that's the shadow you referred to earlier.
Exactly. So welcoming, as one woman put it, she said, I feel like all my black sheep have been welcomed into the barn. And what happens is that ends a struggle in us to try to perfect ourselves, to try to get out of all that. And doing that in mutuality or in these circles of relating, whether they're near or far. Of course, there are many people who are now meeting on Zoom from all over the planet. Something about that principle has become, in some ways, more and more prominent. And we're happy to be, I've been among the pioneers working on uniting the transcendent with that degree of the immanent.
So would this include you stepping out more into a public forum, integrating more with others, or just creating a satsang, if you will, based on your work?
It remains to be seen about future satsangs. My sense is that the drive to crystallize in a kind of individuation process, there's a certain seniority to that. It's not separated from communion and from community, but it seems to me that lots of people are finding it's almost like pods, small groups of people who they're really close with, who really get where they're coming from, and vice versa. And so whether that, we like to say that we already have what I call a loosely knit but deeply connected heart tribe. We've been reconnecting even with people who were working with us in the 90s and went on their way. And now there's a next phase opening up. And to answer the first part of your question, we feel a strong calling. I think I a little more than Linda. She's more naturally, kind of private person, but she's also tremendously talented singer and has been on stage and so forth and so on. So we both got both going on. But there's this sense of needing to get more out there, in some ways, with the parts of our work that are immediately applicable to people right where they are now, without them needing to go through a rot or anything like that, without them being ready for a deep transformational process. And for us then to, that certainly to me is part of the vision, that we're out there more publicly audible and visible, and mixing it up
All right.
with with other people, which we've been doing all along to some degree, but it's time for a coming out for us, I think.
So when do you think this new phase will be in a published form, or how soon into the future are you looking at?
Well, we're to make a book of the type we're imagining. It's going to take some time, as well as some other resources, both financial, human, and so forth, talents. My sense is, things go.
I meant there was a internet buzz there. Say that again.
I was going to say, if things go well, we would be able to bring out the book with a good strong launch in the fall of 2023.
Okay.
It's going to take, with more of our time being freed up for it also. So that's a current challenge, but we have some potential help on that. It's going to take a while to write. I mean, part of what I feel called to do is to make our communication very conversant with our age. So, that's part of why I'm taking Jeremy Johnson's course on Gebser. He's too big of a continent to go wander on without some good guidance and and also a community of people to talk with about it. But also many other things. I mean, I've been kind of collecting books on this, that, and the other of our principles of the work, so I can really reference other people who are making major contributions or have done so, etc.
Well, you've got an element that a lot of other people who speak in the same ballpark as you're speaking are people who like read Wilbur or read Gebser or read somebody that awakens them in some way to as they express it, a life-transforming moment.
Mm-hmm.
But when I hear Jeremy speak and the limitations of a Gebser or others, is that there's nowhere to go with it, to develop it, to work with it. There is okay, yes, and but. There's what do I do with this? How do I engage this? How do I work with it?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's that has always been, what do I do with it, has always been front and center for us. In the early years, Linda likes to say it's not a cookie cutter process. So what we provide is general guidelines. To go deep, it's optimal to be at least in conversation with others who have done so. And more that's becoming, I just see it happening with people, not necessarily with any organizational affiliation. It's so intimate and intrinsic. But yeah, the attention to what do I do with this? How do I further manifest this? How do I refine it? How do I make my greatest, figure out what I'm here to do, not only for myself, but also what's my contribution? And how do I live this, dynamic paradox of being both transcendental and really here?
Oh, see, those are fundamental issues. Like, how do you communicate your understanding that it's such a personal and also impersonal, kind of experience, if you will, to manifestation, to the world? How does it, because the world is not conformed in its present.
No. We can safely say that.
In fact, Depending on what region of the world you are in and what community you're in, it's all kind of environmentally conform to whatever it is that they're conformed
Exactly.
to.
Exactly. So the, we like to say you got to pay attention to the logic of the other's being, but that also takes paying attention to the logic of their culture, of their particular ethnic strain and its collective experience over time. So there's such an embrace of our humanity. I mean, when I started my work and I was talking about embodiment and so forth, most of the people who I knew were really working, chugging on that transcendence. And it's like, what? But now, embodied awakening and embodiment in general is, the flavor, not just of the month, it's ongoing.
It's the soup of the day, I call it.
Yeah. And it's, to me, that's a good sign. And part of what gives me hope, along with folks like our friend Jeremy and quite a number of others who Linda and I are meeting who are, in their 30s, 40s, even some younger, who've already done a ton of work, are deeply integrated people, very wise, and either clearly oriented toward or already having a major impact. And, seeing those people and knowing that, knock on wood, hopefully most of them have many, many, many decades to refine and grow and make their contributions. That's really part of what gets us out of bed in the morning, is being able to serve such folks.
Well, we have to see. I see myself as you probably see yourself. For many of these younger people, the 30s and the 40-year-olds and even the 20-year-olds who are now just entering into, through whatever experiences they're having or whatever literature they're reading, for them to pay attention to us being white males. In a sense, you've got two strikes against you with gray hair. You really have to conform to the language and the times and what that period of that 20 is. Could you imagine us at 20? And we're looking at the world, what the world is. Well, we are the world, right? So when you're 20, you're looking at us saying, oh, you're my grandfather, you're my father, you're my uncle, who, whatever, you're kind of put on a shelf over there and time stamped. So it's a very different, that moment, which is this eternal moment, is what we're speaking about. It's no different.
Yep.
But they're coming into it, as I see it, conform to certain ways of understanding, whether it be, the new spokespeople, the people who are on Rogan's talk show and Wheels platform, or these guys have their way of speaking. And we're coming from a different era. It's interesting we're on an old bottle of wine here. We got a vintage over here.
Well, we're aged port. And maybe, just maybe, the principle of eldership will reemerge.
Well, I hope so, because I remember going to India and I was treated and I'm not complaining, but there was a sense of something like I was not just Grandpa Ed put to the corner. I was Grandpa Ed Baba sitting at the head of the table and being an elder in that community. So there's a whole different sense of, American youth forever, springtime, It's only spring. There's no summer, there's no fall, there's no winter, there's no death. There's just always eternal life. Yeah.
Well, again, climate change and geopolitical and national gyros being spun off, and all the kind of madness of what's happening, and the catastrophe in Ukraine right at this very moment.
One of 10, according to the UN, by the way.
Yeah, and right. That's a whole other discussion we could have, but.
Well, throw the pandemic in there. I mean, I was just reading back in 18 something. Pandemic. It's always so. Those kinds of. I'm always reminded of Buddha and the mustard seed story.
I'm not remembering it at the moment. Who and the mustard seed?
Buddha, the awakened one.
Uh-huh.
It's funny because Buddha really just means the awakened one. So really, Buddha was just what we're speaking about. Buddha, awake. The mustard seed story is always good. Is that a woman came up supposedly, and of course I don't think much was spoken about the Buddha's life until the first council. But anyway, a woman with a dead son approached the Buddha and asked for a miracle. And the miracle was to bring her dead son back to life. Mm-hmm. And the Buddha looked at the dead son and said, okay. So what I'd like you to do first is go to a household in the village where you live and bring me back a mustard seed from a house that nobody died in. He said, okay. And she left. And a couple hours later, the woman came back with her dead son. The Buddha said, do you have a mustard seed? And she said, no, I couldn't find a mustard seed. Every house I went to.
Yeah.
Everybody had died.
Yep.
And this is the reality that I think a lot of people don't really want to fully acknowledge, that this is not a utopian place to work out a healthy, vibrant, vigorous life and get on the spaceship and reestablish civilization somewhere else or here or wherever. I mean, this is a transitory place, and this is where an understanding has to really, a mature understanding has to be infused in this.
And so, I think, while the cult of youth and youthfulness, will no doubt go on, there are many wise younger people who do appreciate or are coming to appreciate the need for the wisdom of elders. And, I think us gray and white-haired ones, have plenty left to contribute. And certainly that's, I hope Linda and I have a good long chunk of time to take this next expression out and see where it goes. I mean, as I was telling you earlier when we were chatting, it's very exciting to have so much newness bubbling, and it's not just because it's new, but there's life is refreshing itself. And the whole process is continuing to evolve. And that's, when I was going through, after I left Adi Da's work,
I think you froze.
The witnessing quality landed in me. And I'm hoping that you're getting this. I just got unstable connection. Okay, so anyway, I was visiting a guy who had become a shamanic mentor to me, who was down in Ojai. So I drove down there, and it was on the trip that this happened as I was driving. And we then talked, and I stayed with him for the better part of a week at his place near Ojai. And at one point I said to him, I don't get it. I mean, I kind of left my guru in disgrace, nobody made me leave, but, the outlook was not good from where I was coming from. And here this process is obviously kicking in a gear. What gives? I don't get it. It's not like I'm, the classic standard, I've marched all the way up the mountain and now this has happened. It looked like I was failing. What's going on? And he had a great comment that stuck with me. He said, spirituality is not just evolutionary, it is itself evolving. Brooks Barton, Green Barton, when he got married. And, that I feel like we are, to use Gebser's language, one of the new mutations of consciousness or existence that's taking place. And I have a hunch that along with other boomers like ourselves and people in the different age groups, there will be more and more people who, just as you were describing, something gets activated by this or that contact that is life altering, but how to manage that when the old maps may no longer be working as well as they did, or at all, if at all. So that's where we're hoping to provide people with an alternative, and especially with those who really do feel called to go deep. And we've been meeting some wonderful people, getting to work with, like one of our current, Linda and I co-coach a number of clients, and one of our people is one of the deans of yoga teachers in a major American city, and who had already gone into the transcendental quality of awareness and landed. He said, it's all about people. And another is, a talented teacher of one of the leading edge somatic psychologies. So, we're blessed to work with such folks, along with people who are kind of just bringing themselves together, but have that spark. And so, there's a combination for us of wider outreach and also the intensive in-person work and, group work also. So we'll keep keeping on and hopefully spin out a few more folks who are, really pretty well cooked and continuing to cook.
Right.
Able to help others do the same. So.
Well, I really do appreciate our time that we spend together in this time. I do notice my audience tends to have a good attention span, but not an enormous one. So maybe at this moment, I think we should just bring this conversation to an end. And I personally would like to thank you very much for your time and the time together to speak. And I look forward to having other conversations, because there's so much involved that we share.
I'm available anytime, Ed, for sure. Just let me know. And, people could, we're needing to revamp our website. It's kind of ancient, but go to the calendar at sanielandlinda.com. And my name is spelled like Daniel with an S, sanielandlinda.com. And there are a variety of things we offer, including free online gatherings. I do a long meditation every couple of weeks. People are welcome to come check us out.
Well, I'll definitely put that on the screen when I work on the video here. And again, okay. I want to thank you very much for your time and what you shared with us.
Really appreciate it, Ed. Really appreciate the opportunity to express, so much about what's current and emerging, because it's certainly where we're living these days.
And definitely a value, I do believe. So thank you. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much, Ed, and blessings to everybody in the B zone. Bless your hearts. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about these things. That mere fact is itself a prayer blessing. That even though we can't see its effects, it's having them. So I'm deeply respectful of everybody who you've convened in this very precious community.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Till the next time.
Till next time, Ed. Yeah.